How Books Work, Real Talk with editors, agents, and publishing insiders. Hosted by writers Julie Satow and Alice Robb. Welcome back to How Books Work. I'm Julie Satow, and I'm here with my co-host Alice Robb. If you've ever wondered how some authors seem to be everywhere, speaking at libraries, bookstores, and literary festivals across the country, while others struggle to even get one stop on a book tour, well, today we're diving into the world of speakers bureaus with Christie Hinrichs, the founder of Authors Unbound, an agency that orchestrates nearly 1,000 author events every year for over 300 writers. We'll talk to Christie about topics like how paid book events come about and what makes for a compelling authors talk. We'll also get into the pros and cons of virtual events and how that has changed since the pandemic, how speakers agents' fees work, and why libraries absolutely can afford to pay for authors talks. We'll also talk to Christie about what sorts of authors should have speaking agents, and my favorite issue, why we see so many more in conversations with moderators these days, rather than straightforward lectures. So whether you're a debut author trying to build your platform or an established writer looking to expand your reach, this episode is for you. This is How Books Work, and let's get to it. Hi. Hi, Christie.
Hello, how's it going?
We're so excited to talk to you. I feel like so many writers don't really know what speakers bureaus do or how they work. And, it's kind of like a black box a little bit. I also have heard all kinds of various things about what you can expect from them, what you can't. So I don't know. It would just be interesting to know also how you got to start a speakers bureau, which is also a kind of,
Yeah,
you know, yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Christy.
yeah. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And instead, here I am. I took a creative writing class in undergrad to help improve my LSAT scores. And it blew my mind wide open. I didn't even realize that working within, I was a ferocious reader as a kid, and just didn't realize that that was a thing you could do for a living. And so it completely changed the trajectory of my life. I switched majors and studied creative writing and history and went on to get a lit degree, an MFA. And then I found myself kind of post MFA, what do you do now? Trying to decide, the next step, which is a huge conundrum for many, many post MFA folks these days. I still really value that experience. I think it was an incredible opportunity and it really helped me learn more about myself. But in the aftermath of it, I was like, oh, what the hell's going to happen now? For a lot of MFA folks, it's like, well, the academic job market is always an option. I just felt like I didn't want where I lived to be held hostage by which college was going to hire me. And that just didn't feel like a really good option for me. And I had run several visiting author series throughout my undergrad and graduate career. So I did like the visiting author series in my creative writing department and endowed lectureship. And I really enjoyed that side of the business. I feel like, attention to detail and hyper organization has always kind of been my religion. And I'm very much type A as a creative in that way, which is a good fit for this kind of work. And so I decided to, try some independent booking and just worked with some authors I had made connections with over the years as an independent booking agent. So just kind of as one-offs with people, I really liked it and decided in 2008, about 6 years ago, to try to start my own agency. And it literally was like over a weekend, I built a website and like, okay, I guess I'm in business now.
That's
and thought
amazing.
I thought it would just start really slow, with like a couple dozen authors that I had some connections with. And boy, I was just really wrong. It grew really fast. And I think, I had kind of a different perspective than a lot of speakers bureaus, and we can kind of get into that. And so my approach was slightly different. And I feel like that really resonated with a lot of the authors that I had already had connections with. And so we grew really fast. Um, and it was incredibly rewarding. Like it was work I really loved, and felt like I was really making an impact in the lives of these authors and with readers. And then COVID happened.
Yeah.
about a year in, and it was, pretty scary for everybody. But for, when your business is putting people on planes and shaking hands, it was pretty devastating. So about 100% of our events canceled within 30 days.
Wow.
And it was dark, and I thought, okay, well, that was fun. I guess I'll go to nursing school or something.
Mm.
Like it was just, it was really scary. And as we sort of started getting our heads around it, along with the rest of the world, we pivoted pretty quickly to virtual. Before that time, I couldn't pay someone to do a virtual visit. Like it wasn't on anyone's radar. And now it's really become a really worthwhile option for a lot of people. So it was an unexpected benefit of what happened with COVID. And then just started trying to plan for how we were going to reemerge after COVID, how the speaking world was going to be transformed by what had happened. And sort of anticipating a return, even though there was no reason to believe that would happen at the time. It was really scary in publishing and in the speaking agency world, everywhere. It was difficult to know what was going to happen. So I did what I called innovating off the ledge. I was like, okay, I'm just going to plan for a big return and success and try to see how we can diversify the types of markets that we're in moving forward so that hopefully we can kind of maybe head off any other future catastrophes we can't anticipate. And so rather than just staying in that lane of like, libraries and community reads programs and fiction and narrative nonfiction, we started two new branches of the agency. So Authors Unbound is really the main core branch of the agency. But then we started Authors Out Loud, which is a kidlit side, which works exclusively on youth programming, children's books, teen YA, and new adult. And then also Authors Outside, which is all environmental books and climate change and food sovereignty and sustainability, Native American issues, those types of things, so that we could try to kind of expand. We felt like, those hosts have such different needs and such a different set of circumstances they're dealing with, both with funding and how they're planning their programming. They really needed like a discrete and separate way of looking at those events. And we built it and they came. So that's kind of the bounce back after COVID has been amazing, unexpected. I mean, I now have 10 full-time employees. We have an awesome team. We do about 800 events a year, and represent about 300 plus authors. So that it has been my journey so far. I'm really lucky. I feel really grateful to have landed here, especially considering everything that's happened to us collectively in the last few years.
Yeah.
So,
How do you think the event space has changed in the last few years?
well, I mentioned virtual, and that has really just opened up programming for groups that could never hope to have hosted an author in the past. Because virtual visits are less expensive than in-person visits and there's no travel expenses, it's really made that kind of programming more inclusive for lots of different types of hosts. So we see often, on the West Coast, we do a lot more. It's weird. Geographically, it kind of makes a difference too. On the West Coast, we do a lot more virtuals because I feel like communities are further apart. They've really kind of adopted that asynchronous way of being in the world. And there's a lot of work from home people. It's just a much different type of community than like the Northeast or the East Coast, where like they were, just desperate to get back in the room with authors. So that's been a real difference. It's also just sort of extended the offerings that we can give to a host when they get in touch with us. If they're not able to host the particular person that they want live and in the room, we can offer them a virtual option. Or we've even done like sort of a hybrid situation where the author is appearing live on stage on a big screen to a gathered audience. And that's worked really well to help like get authors to a place that they would normally not be able, whether that's, travel restrictions or the cost of actually being there. It's been great. We've even moved into what we call like a pre-recorded screening where we record, especially for some of our highest demand authors. We've professionally produced their lectures or several of their lectures with slides and in a very beautiful format. And then we can license that to groups who want to screen it with their audiences. But again, the author can't make it or can't make a live event work, and that's been really successful. So certainly that's been the case. I've also seen a huge shift into conversation formats. So before, where hosts would be really insistent on prepared remarks and that like stately lecture from a podium, now many authors have said, nope, the conversation format is so much better. It's so much more inviting and feels more immediate and personal to their audiences, and they really are insisting on it. And the hosts are agreeing. And so we're seeing much more fireside chat, moderated conversation kind of formats. My favorite kind of format, I often will suggest this to hosts, is kind of a mix of everything, where we have the author maybe give like 10 or 15 minutes of prepared remarks about, how they came to the book or their journey as a writer, that kind of thing. And then about 20 minutes of moderated conversation with somebody that the community selects, followed by like an audience Q&A. That's just been a really wonderful format for a lot of hosts that we didn't even imagine would be possible, or not so much pre-pandemic, I would say.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because, like, absolutely for authors, obviously, like, our ability to connect with audiences has changed so much. We can talk to them via Zoom. I mean, just last night I did a book club, on Zoom, whatever. You could never do that before, right? That kind of thing. But it's interesting because, there's an expectation that we would often do talks. Pro bono. So most authors don't have speakers bureaus and they're just going and willingly doing it. So I wonder, like, just from like the business side of things, do you think there's been any change in like understanding that authors should be paid for it or how that works? Because you were mentioning like libraries and stuff. Typically, they're not doing book sales. They're not necessarily, I don't know if they're always paying authors. I guess it depends on the library, but I'm just wondering about that business side of things, which is very murky for a lot of us writers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I do think that that is shifting. I really see our role as an agency as advancing that cause and helping hosts understand that we need to pay for content. We need to pay artists for their time now more than ever, when funding is being pulled from really important artistic agencies across the country, and libraries are being devalued. This is really important right now more than ever. So that's really our mission, is to kind of help hosts understand, yes, we need to compensate authors. And I would also say that the idea that libraries don't pay or don't have book sales is kind of a misconception. Every library we work with, we require them to have on-site sales through a local indie in our contract. So they partner with a local bookstore who is happy to come with a credit card machine and a staff member to sell books. And that is almost never an issue. We're also trying really hard to build in a book bundle whenever we can. So often book sales come from kind of a different budget allocation. And so if we can kind of start that conversation or just help the host understand who to make the ask with within their organization, we can include that in the actual contract. But to more broadly answer your question, yeah, budgets range wildly depending on where you're at in the country, what kind of support that particular library has. We often see in big metros where they're getting authors on tour a lot, budgets are less for hosts because they can get authors on a publicity tour, or they've gotten used to that model. It's changing, I'll say, actively, but they've gotten used to that. So some of the bigger metros are more difficult to find paid programming. Suburban areas, or folks in the Midwest, or Arkansas, for some reason, has amazing funding for their artistic programming, which is great. Ohio is wonderful. I think we work with every single library in Ohio on some kind of level. So it really depends. But one of the missions that we have as an agency is to build long-lasting relationships with every host that we work with. So we really put in the extra time, not only to, like I mentioned before, help them kind of get real about what it's going to take to host an author, but also help them develop those funds, give them ideas and resources in order to find the programming or gather up the stakeholders that they can within their community to put on an event that's really going to be impactful and important. And also helping those programmers understand, like, there are bigger goals than just getting butts in the seats. Like, let's think about what conversations you want to have within your community. What's really important to you and your readers and your attendees, and how can, we create a real experience here outside of just the event of meeting an author that you might, be excited to get your book signed by or something like that. And that really, I think, goes a long way with some of these hosts and helps them understand and get organized about how to find the funding that they need to host programming like that.
So how does it typically work? Does a host come to you and find you via their website, or they're interested in the author and they come to you, or are you actively going out there and trying to cultivate relationships with, different whatever private clubs or whatever it might be? I don't know how. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, is the answer. We're booking dates in one of three ways primarily. And the first is by direct request. So all the authors that we work with and that we represent are listing us as the point of contact on their websites. And so when a host or a committee member hears about them, gets interested, goes to their website, finds our contact info, and gets in touch. So we're doing that initial kind of fact finding and exploring what the possibility might entail, and then bringing that invitation to the author in a formal proposal. About half the events are coming in that way, typically. Where we call it over the transom, where they're just coming in from the author's website. Sometimes it works out great. The negotiation is quick, and we book the event within a couple of weeks, which is wonderful. Most often it's not. Most often we're working with those folks for months to both, educate them, help them find partners within their community, gather up stuff that they can use in applications for funding and things like that. And it takes a lot longer. So we're spending a lot more time with those folks. And I think, again, that's kind of what sets us apart a little bit, is that we're really investing a lot of time and energy in the host. I see that our role really as kind of dual. One is representing the author and helping to manage that side of their career and supporting them with the travel and logistics and the details and being strategic about what kind of events are going to be most impactful. The other side is supporting the hosts. I mean, these guys don't really have an advocate in this process. Often they want to host an author, they get in touch with a speaker rep, and they're told, great, the fee is this. Pay it or don't. And that's kind of where the conversation ends. And they don't understand really what that means, or how things vary, or, what opportunities they might be able to opt themselves into. And so we really see our role as helping those guys as well. I mean, we work with a lot of giant-hearted programmers, librarians and university folks, and people heading literary organizations who are wearing a million different hats. And just don't have the bandwidth to learn how to do it themselves. And so we're really trying to offer that support and resource to them as well. So, but back to direct request. That's the first way. About half the events we're doing come in that way. The second is what we call elected outreach. And that's where we're leveraging the relationships we've already built with hosts around the country. I mean, we've got a database of thousands of hosts and we try to really stay on top of who has hosted who and when, so that we can kind of get a sense of what they've liked in the past, what kind of budget ranges they might be in, so that we can be really responsive when we get those requests in. So every time an event wraps up that we're booking, we're circling back to that host and saying, okay, what's next? Who can we introduce you to? What kind of goals do you have for next year? Like, what are the things that are really important within your specific community that we can help address and find you a speaker who's going to be a perfect fit for that particular goal? So we're making suggestions to committees every day, constantly, and really nurturing those relationships. There are hundreds of libraries across the country that I've worked with year after year after year on all of their programming, because, one of the best ways that we can ensure they want to work with us again is to put on be really helpful, put on a really good event. And so those efforts have been rewarded with a lot of loyalty with our libraries, which we really, really value. We also are making alternative suggestions when a host requests an author who is either out of budget range or unavailable. So if they want their budget is a certain range that just isn't going to get there with the author that they're choosing, we're making alternative suggestions. Maybe that's a new and upcoming, an author on the rise who is still sort of developing their speaking career, or maybe it's somebody who's closer in proximity to where they are, so that travel and expenses are slightly less. So we're really trying to keep that conversation going, even if it's, not a good fit in the initial part of that request. That's elective. And then the third is what we call targeted outreach. So this is where we know an author is going to be in a certain place at a certain time. Maybe it's an event we booked for them. Maybe it's a professional obligation they have somewhere, a personal trip. And they've told us about it and asked if we can, feel it out within that area. We reach out to all of the people we have connections with in that geographic area and see if we can block book things together. So we're making the offer to these individual hosts. We've got this author coming through. Are you interested in hosting them? Often they are eager to jump on those opportunities because they're going to save some money in terms of expenses. The fees are often reduced because the author is already in town. And it's a win-win for everybody. It maximizes the author's time and energy, gets them more exposure while they're traveling. We're always offering that service if we're putting an author on a plane, for example, and it's not an easy drive or easy travel. The second part of that is something we're kind of doing new this year. We just launched it this year, which is a site on a spot on our website where hosts can actually opt in to some of these opportunities. So we're posting where the author is going to be and when, so that the host can go on, put in their zip code, and find all of the authors that might be visiting within proximity to them of a certain mileage range and when. So then they can get in touch with us and say, hey, I see, this isn't going to work for me this time, but I see you've got so-and-so coming through next fall. I want to jump on that particular event. The other part of it is called Authors Near Me. That one is Authors on the Road. The Authors Near Me is where, again, they can put their zip code in and find out which authors might be based within proximity of their home base. So those events often are less costly for the host because the author has less prohibitive travel is involved, and often fee reductions are more possible in that particular respect. So that's targeted outreach. And then we're also doing quite a bit more recently, publisher collaboration. So because we have so much more runway where lead time is concerned than many publicists, if we know a new release is coming, we can kind of soften the ground in those particular geographic markets that the publisher wants to hit, or anchor tour stops based on our paid events. And we're always prioritizing the book buy in those cases. So above the fee, above the expense of it, because we know that's going to be the priority of the author and the publisher, is to try to get as many pre-order sales as we can. So in those cases, even if the date is a little bit murky, we can kind of, check in with the publicist. We really like to have good contacts with the author's publicist so that we can make sure that we're not stepping on any toes and really contributing and collaborating with those efforts. And book events that they can build tours around that include like a book with ticket or a pre-order with a local indie. So that's happening more and more. And that sort of goes into how publishers are handling publicity tours, how that's changing quite a bit. We're trying to be responsive to that as well. So yeah.
Wow. And what can authors do to kind of help all this along? What makes a good, and what do you look for in an author that you're signing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that first and foremost, we want to really love their work. And to be enthusiastic about what they're doing and want to extend that into the world and meet readers. We read a lot. The vast majority of the authors that we're bringing on are by referral, either by literary agents or the authors that we already represent. And in those cases, we want to review their work and we talk about it as a team. We're really collaborative. We meet every week and talk about new books and new pitches and where we could probably see someone fitting into our roster for the folks that we're considering. So that is really the number one goal of connecting with the author. The second, I would say, is, do they need us? Does this author actually need us right now? Usually the sweet spot for when we first start to work with an author is when their invitations start to become cumbersome. So they're getting more invitations in than they can really reasonably respond to. Not that they're all, top dollar invitations. Some of them are gratis invitations. Some of them, are, but they're just getting a lot more response to their work. And the logistics of doing events and traveling for events is becoming a burden. That's really when we're like, okay, our services to you are going to be really worthwhile. We charge commission on every event that we do. So that commission is taken off the gross fee. So we want to make sure that the authors that we're working with understand and value that contribution that we're making to their speaking career, in helping them to manage not only the invitations that are coming in, but also to be thoughtful about how we're representing them to the world. Because some authors, they love libraries. They feel bad about charging libraries or other groups. They don't really know what's appropriate. And so we want to make sure that we're representing them in a way that the host knows that they're grateful and they want to make it work if they can. And this isn't a situation of, sorry, I won't get out of bed for less than $10,000 or whatever it is. We're really trying to protect their reputation and their image within their fans and audience members. So do they need us? That's a big question that we're asking. If it's a brand new author, sometimes we'll bring on like a debut author that we're just really excited about and think that, is going to be an excellent suggestion to our hosts. But normally we want to make sure that they've got a track record of speaking, that they like speaking. Turns out you don't have to be a good speaker to be a good writer. And so we really try to understand that that's an area of their career that they're enthusiastic about and they like to meet readers, and what about those events really works best for them so that we can help to kind of point audiences in that direction. And then the third one, I think, is just making sure that our values are aligned with that author. Like it's never our goal to get the absolute most amount of money we can in an event. We really want to create an equitable experience for everybody so that the host feels like they're paying a fee they can afford and they're getting something for that investment that's really going to be worthwhile for their attendees. And the author feels like they're being fairly compensated for what they're doing. That ranges wildly. Like we'll usually set a target fee for an author, but we're really letting the author take the lead on whether or not they want to do any particular event. So every event is presented holistically as its own thing to each author. And so we want to make sure that that's clear to them, that, the experience of doing events and meeting readers is really the priority, or over, making $1 million. We're never going to become millionaires in this business with our business model, because we're really value driven. We want to help authors extend the message of these authors and hosts and create more readers in the world. That's really the main goal and vision. We have a very strict no asshole policy. So if we feel like that we're just not aligned in that way, then it's not a good fit, and we'll graciously decline.
You mentioned how, it's changing a little bit with tours and stuff for authors. I think most authors I know, get a limited tour when their book comes out. It's not typical anymore to get the big 2-week, on the road, whatever. Or if they're doing that, a lot of it is their own legwork, typically booking stuff themselves. So I wonder, like, yeah, you were saying you work with, that's interesting about the pre-order concept with publishers. Like that makes so much sense. But I wonder, yeah, like how is that relationship developing, and so you typically work with the publicist, not necessarily the marketing person. Like I'm just curious how you fit into that ecosystem.
It sometimes depends on the book and the title, and the publisher, honestly. There are some who are more open to that collaboration than others that we have, a tighter history with. Where this has happened. But yes, usually, I'm hoping to be on the initial calls with the publicist, the marketing folks, and the author, just to kind of listen in. Where are there opportunities for us to contribute? What are the goals of this particular campaign? And how can we add to it? Sometimes that's just getting the word out to our hosts about this new title that's coming out and, sort of jumping on the efforts that the publicist is already making. Sometimes it's much more involved, where they're saying, hey, we've got a lay day between Chicago and St. Louis. Can we find something to fit within that? And then we're doing some really targeted, localized outreach in those areas to see if we can fill that spot. So it does somewhat depend, but you're right. I've seen a lot of changes come, and a lot more efforts on the author themselves, getting out there and beating the streets and making relationships with booksellers. A lot more private publicists coming into the mix outside of publisher support. And it's really a changing landscape right now. Every release is different. So it's really hard to kind of have a baseline for what a publisher is actually going to do with a particular release. I mean, the big ones, obviously, they're going to put all of their effort. It's really become kind of a K-shaped graph where the biggest titles can expect the most support and the most effort on behalf of the publisher. And anyone who falls below that is going to have a really diminishing return on what they can expect from those efforts. So we're just trying to jump in and contribute wherever it makes sense. Sometimes that's by request by the author or the publicist, like, can you help in this particular way? And sometimes it's much more general. We do have, tighter relationships with certain authors where we're really going the extra mile because they've been with us for a long time and we're really familiar with kind of their goals and mission as an author. And others who we kind of back off for that 90 days post-pub date and let the publicist kind of drive that train, get all, make sure that we're not stepping on any toes or impinging on that period, and then picking up where that, 3-month period kind of leaves off on paid events.
Are there certain, I mean, so I know you have such a broad range of authors that you have on your roster. And like you were saying, you're even doing, young adult and, environmental. I wonder, but are there certain things that aside from just enjoying the act of speaking and engaging with the audience that authors should keep in mind if they're interested in this kind of thing, or what sorts of authors you see having the most success, if there's certain, I don't know, certain insights you could give us, for authors who might be interested in trying this. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything out of the box is, I mean, programming or interactions with readers that are new and unique and not typical of a standard event, we love that. So, for example, if an author wants to have a cocktail hour and make a cocktail that appears in the book with a reception group or something like that ahead of the event, that's awesome. If they can do breakout sessions, any kind of workshopping with attendees, any kind of value add that authors can bring to the table, and programming ideas that they're actually presenting. With all the authors that we work with, we ask them to come up with, half a dozen or so topics that they are really excited about. And it doesn't even necessarily have to do with the work itself. If it's something, a life experience they've had, or a type of concern or a mission that they feel really passionate about, that helps us learn more about them, but it also really helps the host kind of see something they like that they didn't anticipate. So being able to offer those things, like, yes, I can speak about this particular book and topic and how I came to the story, but also I can add these really interesting experiences for readers that maybe they couldn't or wouldn't have thought of themselves. So anytime, an author can come to the table with that kind of thinking. For instance, I've got an author who wrote a book about walking to listen, and he leads walks with his attendees as kind of like an add-on where, they go to a beautiful place, they talk about the importance of listening and what it means to kind of be in the world. And we love pitching that to hosts because it's an exciting and new and unique thing that they can offer their patrons and their readers. We've got an author who's just written a memoir/cookbook. So cooking classes with attendees has been really fun to pitch for that particular author. So yeah, and any ancillary programming that they can suggest, especially with community reads programs. That's a type of program we work with a lot. And it's where the entire community is reading the same book and thinking about it for several weeks before the author actually visits. So being able to kind of point that host in the direction of any kind of ancillary programming that might work well, like, here's a movie you should screen because it's really similar in theme or scope to what the book talks about. We have one author who always sends a playlist so that they can be playing that music as the attendees walk in and kind of get into the vibe of what the event's going to be like. So those kinds of fun, interactive things, I think, are really worthwhile, especially for virtuals. If there's a way to kind of incorporate a more exciting and unique aspect of their discussion in a virtual visit, it's awesome. We've done like, let's tour the author's bookshelf and see kind of what are some of the inspiring works that help them in the journey for this particular book. Or Anything that can kind of spice it up and break out, especially for virtuals, because talking into the green light can get a little tiresome for everybody. So making sure that there's a good dynamic exchange with readers, I think has been really successful.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I guess, one thing that I hear a lot from authors about with the Speakers Bureau is that it's like, they're not getting a lot of new events from them, whereas it is mostly like coming from their own websites or whatever. And then,
Mhm.
so, or I mean, the same thing that authors feel all the time, right? I don't know whether it's the publisher
Mhm.
not giving enough marketing dollars or whatever it is, you know,
Mhm.
a crappy bunch. But like I feel like it's always that kind of thing. So I just wonder, like, obviously it's easier with big names if you're a big
Mhm.
famous author, and then typically, I mean, I know that a lot of people also just use their publishing houses Speakers Bureau, which is its own
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
So but I'm sure that's an easier thing, but I just wonder, like, do you find it's like the same authors over and over, or how do you choose which of your authors when you have so
Mhm.
many? Or you know what I mean?
Mhm.
I don't know, I just wonder a bit about that too.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we get it all the time. It's something that we really pay a lot of attention to. We deploy technology, I think, better than many other agencies out there. So we have a really integrated database and a CRM that helps us do some reporting on these types of topics specifically. Like, what are the requests that we're getting? Who are they from? What type of organization? How can we target those organizations moving forward, knowing that this topic, for whatever reason, resonates with this kind of host? And to just be smarter, to work smarter rather than harder when it comes to that. But it is the case that especially for really niche authors, if they're working in a really tight area of focus, it can be more challenging because there's less of a market that we can pitch them to, or that are going to have that kind of like excitement around. I would say that for our authors, usually our back of the napkin math is that we can double the number of events that they're already getting. So if we have an author and they're already getting a certain number of events, per month or per year, that tells us there's already interest out there. We just have to harness it and channel it toward the folks that we think are going to be most excited about that topic. So usually we can if we're booking an event that came in over the transom by a direct request, the chances that we'll be able to suggest them to a host and get some uptake on it is much higher. If we have an author who's not getting a lot of requests, or who is, like I said before, getting very specific requests from professional organizations, or a place that is really hyper focused on that particular topic, it's less likely that we're going to be able to be successful in those pitches. It's probably not a good fit for us at that point with that author. So yeah, we get that question all the time. We really try hard to be as responsive as we can. We do work with a lot of authors, but that's why when we're talking to the host, it becomes a much larger conversation than just like, oh, here are some authors I think you might like. It's like, what are your goals? What is the topic you want to zero in on? Like, what do you want your attendees to leave that program with and take home with? What kind of message do you want them to, what's going to really resonate? And then we respond with suggestions based on that. For that reason, too, we like to have a lot of authors in the same wheelhouse. So if we have a host who really likes contemporary fiction that is humor based, the chances that they're going to like that particular kind of book in the future are pretty high, and we want to work with them again. So we'd like to have a deep bench where that's concerned. I get that question a lot too from authors, like, you already have a billion historical fiction novelists, like, how am I going to stand out? And that's the answer to that question. Like, we're working with so many different kinds of programs. Well, we like to have a lot to offer them year on year.
Mhm. I'm curious, one thing that Julie and I have talked about in other episodes, but I'm curious what your point of view on this is. You mentioned like you're more often seeing authors hiring independent publicists. And it seems like a to work with the Speakers Bureau, like, yes, you take a cut of the fee, but they're not paying you up
Mhm.
front. Whereas with a publicist, you actually are paying up front. So I'm just curious from your sort from where you sit, like, do you would you advise an author to hire a publicist, or what considerations would you, or any other kind of, there's so many independent uh people that you could hire. Are there any that where you see like value?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always advise to work with a private publicist if you can swing it. I feel like you get the maximum bang for your buck in those cases, and that person is really focused on what specific areas you're going to be successful in, based on that particular title. But you're right, it really depends on what kind of book it is, and who the publisher is, and which publicist might be most responsive. Kidlit, I've seen a lot more publicists pop up around Kidlit and children's books, and how to kind of maximize the impact of those releases, because the publishers, particularly in Kidlit, are having a much more shifting landscape in the efforts that they can extend. Um, you know, a historical fiction novel that is really going to hit big in the South. Like, I would hire a publicist based in the South who has lots of connections with ladies' luncheons and auxiliary groups and, book with ticket type of events that are going to really go a long way in that first week of sales, if we can get some pre-orders and that kind of thing. For nonfiction, it gets a little bit fuzzier. Like, it really depends on what kind of audiences are going to have, or what appeal to those audiences is going to make a big impact. If it's something that more popular, more like general consumption kind of stuff, then yeah, I would say working with a publicist works really well. A more like very topic focused monograph might be more difficult, because you're really going to need specific contacts in those specific organizations and markets to be successful. And that's, it's difficult to find a publicist who has that kind of depth in their contacts. But it's something we think about a lot. I can't tell you how many times we have to like gently share with authors, like, we're not publicists. Actually, we don't do that work. And you're right, because we're not getting paid for those efforts. Of course, we want to, we have a reciprocal relationship with our authors. They're sending us their invitations. And so we want to get them in events that we originate with us as much as we possibly can. That's always on our minds. But, getting events for the exposure, or getting a really good podcast, or a really good interview, or, a TV spot, it's just not in our wheelhouse. So it's not something that we can help with a lot. But I would say it's hard to know. And things have been really shifting so much post-pandemic, from what I've seen in the conversations I've had with authors. But many of the folks who have hired private publicists have not regretted that decision.
That's super interesting. And yeah, I feel like we sometimes get more wishy-washy answers when we ask people who work in publishing houses. So
I
that's
mean, just shout out to Suzanne
Okay.
Williams, because I love my
Yeah.
publicist. She's
Yes.
amazing. So yeah.
Yes.
There's we probably need to wrap up soon, but there's one more thing that I was just curious about from your bio. Which is related to the fact that Julie and I met in New York. Julie is still based in New York. I lived in New York for many years. I left New York a couple of years ago. I'm curious, like, about sort of you obviously like built a very successful career in publishing outside of New York, from Alaska to Oregon, and what that's like, and being outside of New York.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in this day and age, you don't really need to be in New York or LA anymore. And I really, that was really important to me too, as I was finishing my MFA. I'm a West Coast girl. Like, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. It's where my heart is. I wanted to raise my son there. I really wanted to get back to that area. So I wanted to pick something that I knew I could do. I travel a lot, and that's great. That's fun. It's a nice departure from my day to day. But it has never been an impediment for me. And we can Zoom, we can call, I travel for events all the time. It really hasn't been a barrier for working with authors. And it's actually often a fun conversation piece, talking about where are you based? And I mean, we work with so many more authors who are no longer based in New York, who have left either, post-pandemic, or as a result of something else, and aren't seeing any impact on their careers either. So it hasn't been an issue for me, honestly.
I mean, it is
Which
such a it's such a relationship business, but
Mhm.
it sounds like, I mean, you're doing events from Richmond, Virginia to whatever, Washington State, right? So, I could see how that, I mean, look, Alice, you and I are doing a podcast you're from in London, I'm in New York,
Yeah.
so we're able to, right. So I do think
Yeah.
that's like the benefit of that. I mean, that's very inspiring. I have to say, Bend is like so beautiful, so you're very
Mhm.
lucky. So.
It is. It is. I love it here. It's an embarrassment of riches, but don't move here, please.
I know. That's what my
Everyone is.
sister says, who lives there. Yeah. You what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this
Yeah.
is great. Well, thank you so much, Christy. We so appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Uh,
fun.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And
Fantastic.
I'm sure people have questions. If they want to get in touch with you, can they just query your website
Oh,
or?
please do. Yeah. AuthorsUnbound.com. All of our email addresses are up there, a contact form. Happy to field any questions.
All right, amazing. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of How Books Work. Join us on our next episode as we continue to explore publishing behind the scenes.